welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. The United States has agreed to lower tariffs on Japanese automobiles to 15%. This is expected to put South Korean companies at a disadvantage in the U.S. market, as they continue to face a much higher tariff of 25%. President Lee Jae-myung called for sweeping reforms to cut unnecessary regulations that discourage companies from doing business in South Korea, saying this is essential for the country's economic growth. U.S. and Chinese officials say they now reached a framework agreement over TikTok, saying the deal would address America's security concerns but maintain the Chinese characteristics of the short video app. The potential deal will likely be finalized on Friday in a call between the two countries' presidents. We begin in the United States, where South Korea's biggest competitor when it comes to auto exports, Japan, is set to begin receiving lower tariffs in the coming hours. The move comes as Seoul has yet to finalize details of a trade deal with Washington to lower tariffs to 15%, including cars. Our Kim Do-yeon starts us off.
A notice on the U.S. Federal Register has made it official. As of Tuesday U.S. time, the tariff on Japanese-made cars and auto parts will fall to 15%. That's a sharp drop from the 27.5% rate Japanese automakers had been paying, which included a 25% tariff under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act. The decision immediately reshapes the competitive landscape in the U.S., one of the world's biggest auto markets. With negotiations on a $350 billion investment package ongoing, South Korean auto exports, the number one export to the U.S., will continue to face a 25% tariff. It leaves South Korean automakers, who are also subject to Section 232 tariffs, at a significant disadvantage, with South Korean and Japanese cars also competing in the same price groups. South Korea's Trade Minister Yo Han-gu is currently in Washington to finalize those talks. Negotiations have reportedly stalled over the terms of the investment deal. Minister Yo says he is focused on getting the lower rate applied as quickly as possible, but not at the expense of South Korea's national interest.
We are working to have the 15% rate applied as quickly as possible. This is a negotiation process, so rather than being swayed by every turn, we are focused on achieving a final result that we can accept.
Meanwhile, Yo also touched on the recent detention of Korean workers by U.S. immigration authorities at a Hyundai plant in Georgia.
It seems the U.S. side also feels its action was a bit excessive, and we will do our best to ensure the interests of our company are reflected.
The trade minister is expected to stay in Washington for 3 days as he works to finalize a deal on the critical tariff issue. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
So trade talks between South Korea and the United States remain deadlocked as the two sides remain far apart on how to manage and distribute profits from the $350 billion investment fund that South Korea has promised. And with tariffs on Japanese auto imports cut to 15% starting today, South Korean companies in the U.S. market are expected to feel the impact. For more on this, we're joined today by Dr. Pan Gil-ju, Assistant Professor at Korea National Diplomatic Academy. Professor Pan, thanks for joining us this morning.
Good morning. Pleased to be here.
So the top trade negotiator, Yo Han-gu, is now in Washington for another round of trade talks, after the industry minister returned home without securing an agreement with the United States. Do you think they'll be able to reach a deal this time?
To be honest with you, it's not going to be easy this time either. As you noted, there are big differences between Seoul and Washington in how to clarify South Korea's investment in the United States, particularly on profit distribution. The rock industry minister's comeback without finalizing details shows how big these differences are between the two countries. In particular, Secretary Rotnick urges South Korea to reach an agreement with the United States under similar conditions that the United States established with Japan. Meanwhile, South Korea will find it hard to reach an agreement with the United States under the same terms as tariff negotiations between the United States and Japan because, first, those terms are not the win-win outcomes that South Korea wanted in the process of designing $350 billion investment projects. The U.S.-Japan agreement-like conditions are most likely to lead to U.S.-oriented profits, not win-win outcomes. To top it off, if the deal were reached in the U.S. favor, South Korea's foreign reserves would go down significantly. Since South Korea's foreign reserves are $410 billion, the U.S. demand would amount to around 90% of its foreign reserves. Second, timing is not good either, since the South Koreans who were arrested and detained in Georgia have just returned home. So it could aggravate anti-American sentiment if Seoul hurries to reach an agreement with Washington before grappling with this incident properly. Russia deals would not be helpful for alliance cohesion either. With this in mind, reaching a deal in short of a time frame is not going to be easy. However, the top trade negotiators visit itself would be helpful to show the United States that South Korea is more than willing to reach an agreement. This show of willingness is helpful for alliance management as well as the ongoing deals. All in all, a long-term negotiation process is more feasible than a short-term deal, although tremendous efforts continue to go on.
I see. So I guess the two sides will need some more time. And the United States has been ramping up pressure on Seoul to sign the final trade agreement. But South Korea has been saying that it will not rush into any deal that undermines national interest. How might the stalled tariff talks affect Seoul's bilateral relations with Washington?
Obviously, the stalled tariff talks pose a challenge to ROK-U.S. alliance or relations. Well, as the United States takes its national interests as the most important under the mega approach, South Korea does too. The talks for win-win deals are supposed to take time, and these talks could be stalled from time to time in this long process. Meanwhile, when the U.S. rush to reach an agreement is taken into consideration, the United States might attempt to make the second case of India or the second case of Canada, which served as the worst case for the bilateral relationship if agreements were not reached early enough. If it takes place indeed, it is not only bad for their economies, but also unfavorable to both national and international security because the stalled talks send a misguided signal to countries in the League of Autocracies, such as North Korea and China. So both South Korea and the United States need to initiate a strategic dialogue between the deal-making efforts as part of risk management. Furthermore, South Korea needs to take advantage of the Make American Shipbuilding Great Again project to step up its leverage over the United States so that the United States will be more flexible with deal-making talks. Inherently, diplomacy is a two-level game where each government should keep an eye on both a domestic audience and a foreign counterpart. So both Seoul and Washington need to share this inherent mechanism of diplomacy through a strategic dialogue. Those efforts are better placed to lead to win-win outcomes for both countries. Moreover, the Georgia incident is obviously terrible and inhumane, but it serves as a driver to fundamentally resolve ingrained problems for their winning outcomes. In this sense, this painful incident provides lessons learned and a rare opportunity for improvement for their relations as well. All in all, the ongoing final trade agreement is not simply tariff talks, but a reference point to determine the cohesion and the health of the ROK-U.S. alliance.
Right, and President Lee Jae-myung will be traveling to New York next week for the UN General Assembly, where he could meet with President Donald Trump. Could Lee's trip provide an opportunity for the two countries to perhaps resolve some of their diplomatic issues?
Well, the second summit between the two leaders will be short because this diplomatic platform is made under the opportunity of multilateral diplomacy. So this summit would be a little different from the August summit, which took place in the White House. Despite this difference, Washington is most likely to take advantage of this platform in the aim of maximizing tariff profits. In this vein, the second ROK-U.S. summit between the two leaders is feasible with an opportunity of the UN General Assembly. focusing more on reaching a detailed trade agreement. Meanwhile, South Korea could take advantage of the second summit for the diplomatic opportunity to make sure that Trump attends the APEC meeting, which will be hosted by South Korea at the end of next month. In this vein, there are some important issues that South Korea and the United States deal with in the possible diplomatic venue. All in all, I would say that this diplomatic venue is not simply important for the bilateral relationship, but also for regional and international security. Moreover, this diplomatic venue matters in the sense that the UN General Assembly will be held for the first time since the second Trump administration and the Yi administration took office. So South Korea needs to set up expanded diplomatic goals for attending the UN General Assembly with multi-layered objectives. First, South Korea's enhanced prestige. Second, a more cohesive bilateral alliance. Third, enhanced coordination among like-minded countries. And finally, the re-functioning UN and the normalizing rules-based order. These objectives will help South Korea rise to the global developed strong power that the Rock administration pursues in terms of diplomatic strategy.
Right, I guess we'll have to see how the negotiations play out. All right, Dr. Pan, thank you so much for your insight today. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
U.S. and Chinese officials have announced that they've reached a framework agreement on the ownership of TikTok's U.S. operations. U.S. President Donald Trump is now planning to speak with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping on Friday to possibly finalize the deal. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
Washington says the United States and China have reached a framework agreement on the future of TikTok's U.S. operations, a move that could end months of uncertainty over the popular social media platform. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent made the announcement during trade talks in Madrid on Monday, explaining that the framework lays the groundwork for American ownership of TikTok's U.S. arm.
We have a framework for a TikTok deal. The two leaders, President Trump and Party Chair Xi, will speak on Friday to complete the deal, but we do have a framework for a deal with TikTok.
In a post on his social media platform Truth Social, Trump wrote that the trade discussions had gone very well and would soon conclude. Without directly naming TikTok, he said an agreement had been reached with a certain company that young Americans were eager to see saved and predicted they would be very happy with the outcome. China confirmed that a framework agreement exists, but insisted that any deal would not come at the expense of its national interests or its companies.
Regarding the TikTok issue, China consistently opposes the politicization, instrumentalization, and weaponization of scientific, technological, and economic and trade issues. China will never seek to reach any agreement at the expense of its principled stance, corporate interests, and international fairness and justice.
The talks come as a critical deadline approaches. Under bipartisan legislation passed by the U.S. Congress last year, TikTok's Chinese parent company, ByteDance, must divest its American operations by September 17th or face a nationwide ban. The measure followed long-standing concerns in Washington that TikTok could share sensitive user data with Beijing, posing a national security threat. President Trump has already granted 3 extensions to the deadline, but pressure has continued to mount for a resolution. Trump also announced that he would hold phone talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping on Friday, while emphasizing the strong relations with Beijing. The phone talks could also spark a potential meeting between the two leaders during next month's APEC summit in South Korea. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The price of gold has seen its steepest surge since 1979, driven by economic uncertainty and inflation fears linked to the Trump administration's tariff policies. Now, that's according to the Wall Street Journal on Monday, which said gold hasn't rallied this much since the 1970s, when inflation soared worldwide following the Middle East oil shock. The price of gold jumped almost 40% this year, outpacing gains seen during the COVID-19 market crash, as well as the 2007 to 2009 financial crisis. The Wall Street Journal also said both small and large investors are flocking to gold as a hedge against growing uncertainty over the U.S. economic outlook and its role in the global economy. Meanwhile, here in Seoul, President Lee Jae-myung chaired an open debate on lowering regulatory burdens for South Korea's economic growth. Our top office correspondent Song Yoo-jin has this report.
Regulatory reform is the key to the growth of South Korea. Presiding over an open debate on Monday with ministers, business leaders, and lawmakers, President Lee Jae-myung called for sweeping changes to what he described as outdated, policymaker-centered rules.
불필요한 규제는 없애거나 축소하고 필요한 규제는 확대 강화하자. 복잡한 이해관계 또 부처 간의 입장의 차이 때문에 정말 거미줄처럼 규제들이 얽혀 있는데 이런 거미줄 규제를 좀 과감하게 확 걷어내자.
He singled out South Korea's punishment-heavy approach to corporate wrongdoing, calling it ineffective. He pointed to the breach of trust laws, saying it has dampened foreign investor sentiment toward the country.
그 결정을 잘못했는지 나중에 너 이렇게 했으면 훨씬 더 잘할 수 있었는데 왜 이렇게 해서 기업에 손해를 끼쳤어? 배임죄로 기소하잖아요. 그것도 유죄가 나서 감옥을 가요. 그 위험해서 어떻게 사업을 합니까? 판단과 결정을 자유롭게 하는 게 기업의 속성인데.
To address this, the finance minister proposed overhauling the system by strengthening financial accountability.
For minor violations, such as failing to file a simple report, we'll shift to administrative fines. If correct orders are followed, the government will accept them. Criminal punishment will only be applied if problems persist.
The discussion also highlighted regulatory hurdles facing emerging industries such as artificial intelligence and mobility. Proposals included creating a platform for data trading to address copyright and pricing issues and expanding test zones for self-driving vehicles. Currently, only 132 autonomous cars are operating in 47 pilot areas across South Korea, which lags far behind China and the U.S., where thousands of vehicles are being tested. Monday's debate marked the first of its kind under the Lee administration. The presidential office will establish a presidential committee for regulatory reform and hold follow-up debates to gather more opinions. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
In other news, the Veterans Affairs Ministry has invited U.S.-Korean War veterans to South Korea to express gratitude and honor their service. Our defense correspondent Kim Bo-kyung had a chance to talk to them.
Most Koreans are familiar with the Incheon landing, the operation commanded by General Douglas MacArthur to reverse the course of Korean War. Celebrating the 75th anniversary of this amphibious landing operation, the Navy held a ceremony on Monday at Incheon City Port. It is not just Koreans who consider the event meaningful, though. U.S.-Korean War veterans who were once stationed here felt the same way, too. Louis R. Quinn, who treated wounded soldiers aboard the hospital ship USS Haven in 1953 as part of the Navy Nurse Corps, was one of them. The 98-year-old was excited to be back in Korea for the first time in 72 years.
It's exciting, and I was trying to find out. I wanted to see where my ship was positioned for 8 months. We were anchored here for 8 months during the war, and then, like I say, after the armistice, they brought the POWs aboard, and we took the POWs back to the States. And we were due to come back the next year, but other things happened. But I have been keeping up with the South Koreans in California.
Rudy B. McKinn Sr., a former U.S. Marine who participated in the Incheon landing and the Battle of Chosun Reservoir, enjoyed the ceremony at the front row. He shared his story of how he got a Korean national flag from a Korean kid at that time, which is still hanging in his office.
And a little kid comes into the bivouac and says, "Is there anything you'd like for me to pick up for you?" He was looking for cigarettes or canned goods or something, anything we could give him. He was starving to death. So I said, "Yes, I would like a copy of, I would like a Korean flag." And he says, "I can get it for you."
The flag drawn on a rice sack was stained with blood from the Battle of Chosun Reservoir. It was framed the wrong way around, but as it's so fragile and weak, he says he just leaves it as it is. With memories of Korean War shared through veterans, our history lives on through the generations. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Choi Ji-hee, and this is The World Now. Starting in the United States, where President Donald Trump said on Monday that a second U.S. military strike on a Venezuelan drug cartel vessel killed 3 people. The strike took place earlier on the same day in international waters on Trump's orders and targeted what he called narco-terrorists transporting illegal drugs towards the U.S. The president described the target as a vessel linked to Venezuelan drug cartels carrying cocaine and fentanyl. U.S. officials released a video showing the vessel exploding and burning. This operation followed a previous strike on September 2nd, which killed 11 people aboard another Venezuelan vessel accused of illicit narcotics trafficking. Trump said the drug trafficking cartels pose a threat to U.S. national security. Meanwhile, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro strongly denounced the strike, saying the country would defend itself against U.S. aggression. The Kremlin said on Monday that NATO was already fighting against Russia with its support for Ukraine. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said at a press briefing in Moscow that NATO is at war with Russia. It is obvious and needs no proof. He argued that NATO's direct and indirect assistance to Ukraine through weapons, training, and intelligence is de facto warfare. Russian officials believe that by aiding Kyiv, NATO is morally and practically in military conflict with Russia. Meanwhile, the UK has ordered fighter jets to Poland as part of a NATO air defense mission following recent Russian drone incursions. The UK announced the deployment of RAF Typhoon jets to conduct air defense missions over Poland as part of NATO's Eastern Sentry mission. Poland has described recent Russian violations as deliberate provocations and threats to European security. Google's parent company Alphabet recorded a new landmark with its market capitalization surpassing $3 trillion for the first time on Monday. Its shares rose more than 4%, closing at a record high of nearly $252. This makes Alphabet the 4th company alongside Apple, Microsoft, and Nvidia to surpass the $3 trillion mark. Fueled by stronger than expected growth in its cloud division and a favorable U.S. court ruling earlier that spared Alphabet from having to sell its Chrome browser and Android operating system, it has witnessed a roughly 32 to 33% stock rise this year, outpacing the S&P's 12.5% gain. Finally, at the Tokyo World Athletics Championships on Monday, Armand Duplantis won his 3rd straight world title with a jump of 6.3 meters, breaking the pole vault world record for the 14th time. The 25-year-old American-born Swede had already secured the gold medal before attempting the new record and nailed the 6.3-meter mark on his 3rd and final attempt. The new record is a centimeter higher than his previous record height of 6.29 meters, which he achieved in Budapest last month. Duplantis told reporters after winning the gold that this is like very much extra special because this is our most important competition of the year.
It surely has been raining a lot lately. Let's talk about heavy passing showers first. Sudden downpours may strike anywhere nationwide with as little as 5 millimeters to as much as 60 millimeters. Showers may come with gusty winds, lightning, and at times rainfall rates near 30 millimeters per hour. Then from late tonight, heavier rain clouds will move in with rain pounding down across the central regions first. It could pour down up to 80 millimeters in the capital area, inland Gangwon-do province, as well as Jeju Island, as much as 60 millimeters in Chungcheong-do provinces and Jeollabuk-do province. Overnight, rainfall could intensify to around 20 millimeters per hour. But now, let's check on today's highs. Seoul will get up to 28 degrees Celsius. Daegu, Gyeongju, very hot at 33 degrees. After the rain clears, cooler air will move in, dropping temperatures to as low as 22 degrees Celsius by Friday here in Seoul. But highs will jump to the mid-20s by the weekend with more rain in the forecast over the next few days.
Now that is all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at 5 p.m. Korea time. Thanks for watching.